Hey there, deep divers. Welcome back for episode 11. Today we're going somewhere a little darker.
Literally.
Yeah, literally and figuratively. We're talking about caves, specifically the Nutty Putty Cave incident.
Okay.
Joining me is Sarah, our expert on all things survival and resilience.
Hi, everyone.
Now, Sarah, this case, it's a tough one. I mean, you usually deal with stories of incredible human strength, right?
Right.
But this, well, it reminds us that sometimes even the best efforts aren't enough.
That's true. And it really highlights the importance of understanding the risks involved in these kinds of activities.
Yeah, exactly. So we're diving deep into the story of John Edward Jones, a medical student who tragically lost his life in this Utah cave right before Thanksgiving.
Yeah, a time when most people are thinking about gathering with loved ones, enjoying a good meal.
It's almost like adding an extra layer of tragedy to the story.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to figure out, how did this happen? How did someone with caving experience end up trapped in a cave visited by thousands?
Well, first we need to get a sense of the cave itself. Nutty Putty is known for its tight spaces, winding tunnels. It's basically a maze underground.
A maze with only one way in and one way out.
Exactly. Which means that knowing the established routes is absolutely crucial.
So if you go off the beaten path, so to speak, things can get a little dicey.
To put it mildly, yeah.
Okay.
John had some experience with caving, but it seems he hadn't been in a while. He went to Nutty Putty with his brother Josh and some friends, none of whom had explored this particular cave before.
So you've got a group of friends excited for the holiday thinking, hey, let's go explore this cave we've heard so much about. Seems innocent enough.
And initially it probably was. They had a map and stories from others to guide them. But it seems John, perhaps feeling a bit too confident, decided to deviate from the planned route.
Okay, hold on. Confidence? You mean like the, I've got this, I can handle anything kind of confidence?
It's hard to say for sure, but sometimes in these high-risk activities, overconfidence can lead to ignoring warning signs, underestimating the dangers.
Right. You think you're invincible. And in a cave like Nutty Putty, that can be a fatal mistake.
Exactly. Now, there are two main paths in the cave after a certain point. One is called Bob's Push, or sometimes the Birth Canal. I know catchy names, right?
Yeah.
It's a tight squeeze, but it's well explored, documented. The other is Ed's Push, much lesser known, and definitely not for the faint of heart.
I'm sensing this Ed's Push is where things took a turn, am I right?
You are, John, for reasons that are still unclear, ended up in Ed's Push. Maybe he mistook it for the other path. Maybe he wanted a challenge. Whatever the reason, it was a decision with dire consequences.
Okay, so he's in this more difficult section. Ed's Push, what makes it so treacherous?
Well, picture this tight twists and turns almost like a natural obstacle course, and there's one section called the corkscrew that's particularly notorious.
Corkscrew sounds unpleasant.
It is, and there was actually an incident there a few years earlier where a teenager got stuck, took rescuers 14 hours to get him out.
Wait, so this section already had a history of people getting trapped and they still let people go in there?
Caves are inherently risky, and this one was open to experienced cavers, but it's a good example of how even in familiar environments things can go wrong.
And in John's case, they went very wrong.
They did after navigating the corkscrew. John continued into a narrow section, thinking there was an opening ahead to squeeze through this tight spot. He had to exhale all the air from his lungs.
I'm feeling claustrophobic just hearing about this.
Imagine being there. He squeezed through, but instead of an opening, he found a sloping passage that started pulling him downwards. Gravity fatigue, the narrow space, it all worked against him. He was essentially stuck headfirst in a downward slope.
And there was no turning back.
Not easily. He kept crawling forward, hoping to find a wider area to turn around. He saw what he thought was an opening.
So a glimmer of hope, maybe?
That's what he thought, but as he inched closer, he realized it was a dead end. His torso was wedged and his arms pinned, and the space was so tight he could barely breathe.
Okay, so he's trapped upside down in a tiny space, struggling to breathe. This is the stuff of nightmares.
It was a nightmare scenario. He started calling out for help, and his brother Josh, who was behind him, managed to reach him.
What did Josh do? Was he able to pull John free?
He tried, but it was impossible. John was completely stuck. Every attempt to move him just made things worse after nearly an hour of struggling. They knew they needed to call for help.
So Josh leaves to get help. What was John's situation like at this point? Was he injured?
Well, besides the obvious terror and discomfort, the position itself was incredibly dangerous. Gravity was pulling him deeper into the crevice, putting immense pressure on his chest. Imagine being upside down for hours.
It makes my head spin just thinking about it.
It was a fight for survival from that moment on, and...
That's where we'll pick up after a quick break.
Okay.
See you in a bit.
We're back, and I have to admit I'm already feeling the weight of this story. John's stuck upside down, his brother racing to get help. It's a lot to process.
It's a stark reminder of how quickly things can go from a fun adventure to a life or death situation.
Absolutely. So Josh goes to get help. Who was the first person to reach John? A woman named Susie Mata. She knew Nutty Putty well and didn't hesitate. She even tied a rope to her ankle just in case.
Smart move considering what happened to that teenager in the corkscrew.
Yes.
So Susie reaches John. What was his condition like at this point?
You know, despite everything, he was reportedly calm. He still had hope, believing that professional rescuers would be able to get him out.
It's amazing how resilient the human spirit can be, even in the face of such adversity.
It is, but unfortunately, Susie's attempts to free him were unsuccessful. The rope kept getting caught in the narrow passages, and it became clear they needed a more complex approach.
I can imagine it wasn't as simple as just pulling him out.
Not at all. They decided to set up a pulley system similar to what they used to rescue that teenager years earlier. But this was no easy feat. They were dealing with narrow twisting tunnels, hard rock, and a considerable distance from the entrance.
It sounds like a logistical nightmare, even without the added pressure of a life hanging in the balance.
It was while the rescue team worked tirelessly to set up the pulley system, others focused on keeping John's spirits up. He was a devout Christian, and prayer seemed to offer him some solace during those long hours.
In a situation like that, I imagine any source of comfort would be welcome, but as time went on, his physical condition must have been deteriorating, right?
Absolutely. Being upside down for prolonged periods is incredibly dangerous. His organs were pressing down on his lungs, making it even harder to breathe.
I remember reading somewhere that the human body can only withstand being upside down at a 90-degree angle for about 10 hours.
That's right. And John was trapped for much longer than that. He started experiencing hallucinations, his memory was fading, and the pain must have been excruciating.
It's difficult to even imagine the physical and emotional toll he was enduring. Did he know how serious his situation was?
He must have had some idea, but he continued to cling to hope when the pulley system was finally ready. There was a surge of optimism they started to pull, but John screamed out in pain. His legs, which had been deprived of circulation for so long, were numb and turning blue.
Oh, that's just heartbreaking. So close yet so far.
The rescuers were faced with an agonizing dilemma: move quickly and risk further injury to John, or move slowly and risk losing him altogether. Inch by inch they pulled, and for a moment it seemed like a miracle might happen.
A glimmer of hope in this seemingly impossible situation.
But then tragedy struck again. The low ceiling of the passage meant that as they pulled, John's feet hit the roof. His legs, numb and unbending, caused him to become even more tightly wedged.
So what did they do? Did they try to adjust the pulley system?
They tried everything they could. One of the rescuers, Ryan Schertz, was even injured during the rescue attempt when a carabiner snapped and hit him in the face.
A carabiner?
It's a metal loop with a spring-loaded gate used for connecting ropes and other climbing gear.
Got it. So this rescue attempt was putting even the rescuers at risk.
Absolutely. It was a desperate situation. Ryan had to be pulled out for medical attention, and his father, Dave, took his place. Dave was determined to free John, but after getting stuck himself for 15 minutes, he realized the horrifying truth: pulling a 200-pound man from that crevice without John being able to help himself was simply too dangerous.
That realization must have been devastating for everyone involved.
It was a turning point. They continued to try, but John's responses were getting weaker. He was able to speak with his wife one last time through a communication system, but his voice was fading.
I can't even imagine the emotions everyone must have been going through at that point, knowing that time was running out, but still clinging to hope.
It was a harrowing experience for everyone involved. One of the rescuers, Brandon Koalas, reported hearing John take some gurgling breaths before falling silent. It was a sign that the end was near.
And after all that effort, all that struggle, what happened next? It's tough to even find the words, knowing what's coming, but we have to talk about it. Where did things go from that moment of silence?
At 11:56 p.m. on Wednesday, November 25th, John Edward Jones was pronounced dead.
After 27 hours.
Yes, despite the heroic efforts of over 20 rescuers, 6 of whom put themselves in incredibly dangerous positions to try and reach him in that unmapped section of the cave, they couldn't save him.
I imagine there was a lot of second-guessing, maybe even guilt among the rescue teams.
It's understandable. Anytime there's a loss like this, it's natural to wonder what if. But from everything we know, they did everything humanly possible.
And yet John's body remained trapped.
Due to his position, and the onset of rigor mortis recovery was deemed impossible.
Rigor mortis.
It's the stiffening of the body that happens after death. It's a natural process, but in this case, it made an already impossible situation even more complicated.
So what happened to the cave?
Out of respect for John and his family and to prevent future tragedies, Nutty Putty Cave was sealed.
Sealed permanently.
Yes, first, the entrance to Ed's Push was closed off, and eventually the entire cave system. It stands as a somber memorial to this tragic event.
It's a stark reminder that nature, while beautiful and awe-inspiring, can also be unforgiving.
It's a balance, isn't it? The thrill of exploration, the desire to push our limits, and the need for respect and caution.
John's story is a tragedy on so many levels, but maybe, just maybe, something good can come from it.
I hope so. If his story makes even one person think twice before taking unnecessary risks, if it encourages even one person to be more prepared, then maybe some meaning can be found in this loss.
That's a good thought, Sarah. A good thought. This has been a heavy episode, but an important one. We've learned about the Nutty Putty Cave incident, the complexities of cave rescue, and the fragility of life. We've seen how a seemingly simple decision could have devastating consequences, and how human resilience can be both inspiring and heartbreaking. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we leave you with some questions to ponder. Could this accident have been prevented? What lessons can we learn from John's story about risk assessment and decision-making in challenging situations? What are your thoughts on the decision to seal the cave, leaving John's body entombed? We encourage you to share your reflections on our social media channels. This is a story that deserves to be discussed, remembered, and learned from. Until next time, stay curious, but stay safe.